Hello, and welcome to my podcast series entitled My Experiments with Truth. In these series, I will be sharing insights that I have gained through my experiments with truth, insights that helps me continue the journey and live a more fulfilling life, and to see deeper into the concepts and the truth of life. This is a continuous journey, so it is a process that I'm undergoing to try to personalize the truth of life. So today I actually want to be speaking on the notion of comfort because we hear this so often. Comfort him, comfort her, and everyone wants to be comforted in times of grief and sorrow. We always want to comfort. But what does comfort mean? What is the actual concept? And what is the right way to comfort? So, just for a little background, I did a little investigation, and now the word comfort, there is the word fort, the Latin base word, F-O-R-T, and that's the same base word you find in fortify and other words. And that base word means strong. So, to comfort is to strengthen. So, in other words, when we say comfort, we wish to be comforted, it means that we want to be strengthened. We want to be fortified. Because only when we are strengthened can we be infused with power to be able to navigate through any situation soundly. However, we must understand that when we say comfort, right, I've noticed that in order to be strengthened, it means that the weak spots within us has to be sublimated, has to be refined. Because anytime we're facing grief, it is usually the weakest points in the heart and soul that gives rise to the greatest suffering. No matter what it is, if you think about it, okay, so lose a job, and automatically we think the worst. This situation is misfortune, is going to cause me to suffer, it is going to change my life for the worst. We think in this way because our concept is that this job was my livelihood. So because of that, losing it, our attachment brings about that pain. So we want to be comforted, but most times when people say comfort, they really mean they want to be swaddled and placated and pacified. That's what we mean when we say it often. But in order to be strengthened, that misconception has to be addressed and purified. So in order for us to be comforted, we have to first of all identify the weakest spots that offer the anchorage by which we interpret events that causes us to suffer. If you think about it, our concepts is almost like a roof, and it's only the weak spots that will offer the greatest point of attack, whereby when it rains, the rain is only going to leak through where there are holes in the roof and nowhere else. So when we're going through things, the first step what we have to do is identify what are my concepts and how does this cause me to suffer? When we identify what our misconceptions are, that is causing us to interpret the situation in a way that gives rise to our suffering, then we are on the first step towards addressing, okay, now what is the right concept? Otherwise, it will lead us towards suffering. And in fact, the lack of recognition of this is what leads to unforgiveness. We believe someone did us wrong. And because we believe that through that person we were put in a misfortune, and our lives would have been more ideal had they not done that, then we hold a grudge, or we become very antagonistic and bitter. But in reality, if we identify what was the weak point within our own hearts that made it easy for us to react that way, or to feel this anger, or to feel this bitterness, and if we try to strengthen that through correcting and purifying that concept, then we put ourselves in a situation, or rather on a path towards being strengthened. Only when we try and undergo this process personally can we be in a position to help others. So if a friend is going through a trial, it is not healthy to just go and say, "Oh, no, you're right. This happened to you. Oh, I'm sorry." If they're going through something, to really comfort them, the first step is the recognition of what is causing them the suffering in their hearts. How are they choosing to interpret the situation, the experience that is oppressing them? Because only when you find that and that is sublimated, can they then be fortified and thus strengthened and thus elevated to be able to feel contentment, to navigate through the situation in a way that will be reasonable. That's what I've realized is the basis that needs to be done. And we cannot do anything for others without first doing it in ourselves, and it has to be a regular practice. And this requires a lot of self-honesty, because if truth be told, we wallow in victimhood and enjoy the notion that things happen to us that we didn't give rise to, and that things happen that are not there to teach us a lesson, that just comes to cause us grief. We want to believe this because that means we don't have to exert any energy to change what is within our own hearts. But the truth is that everything comes to offer us a chance to improve ourselves in some way. And when we're grieved, it's because we have adopted a misconception that allows us to be oppressed. And the situation is really neutral. And nothing can ever strip or take away our capacity to choose how we respond inwardly. And that's what we have to get in the practice of doing. So the notion of comforting then means that when we face a situation, we have to look within towards what is causing us to be grieved and then change that. So that means that the weakest of what is within our hearts needs to be purged. And I believe that when you look at the promise that Jesus gave, that is attributed to Jesus, where he said, "But the Comforter, which is the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things, and bring all things to your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you." We take this as some comforter coming and soothing us and swaddling us. But in this is also a warning as well as a promise, because a comforter, someone who comforts, comes to strengthen. And that means that the weakest points within the human spirits is what will be sublimated, meaning that in order to be strengthened, the human spirits, will have to sacrifice and give up those misconceptions that causes us sorrow. You see? And then if we're unwilling to give it up, they will be forcefully burned out. And understanding the implications of that is really important. And so that means that for us to be comforted by the Holy Spirit and by the truth, we have to know that there cannot be any rigid clinging to misconceptions or delusions, and that in all situations we have to be willing to relinquish what is within us. We have to be willing to relinquish those misconceptions and delusions within us that we've adopted and nursed and reinforced, that has now so integrated itself into our hearts. Those are the things that will be sliced out and that will be confronted by the Comforter. And only when we then make that change to adopt the truth as it is, will we then be strengthened and thus comforted. And seeing it this way and trying to practice it is really helpful, because it puts us in the driver's seat, so that no matter what happens to us, or no matter what situation arises, we are always in a position to take control. We always have the opportunity to inspect our hearts and to self-assess our reactions and our notions, and then change it. In this way, I believe that we can be strengthened, and which would then enable us to be comforted. The decision always lies in our hands. And in this voluntary compliance with purging the delusions and misconceptions that causes us to suffer. In this voluntary action, we take a step towards being strengthened, towards sealing the cracks in our hearts and minds, and in the souls and in the spirits. And in that way, we're fortified. And in being fortified, we can then experience more contentment. In the same way that if you're in a building that's well fortified, the roof and the walls, no matter the storms that are raging, inside the house you feel calm and content, because everywhere is sealed and everywhere is strengthened, the walls and the roof and the foundation. But it is when you know that the house is weak that you feel nervousness and anxiety. So in that same way, anyone who's serious is not going to stand around and blame this person or blame the weather for bringing the storms and say, okay, it's because of you brought the storms that my house is leaking. No, nature may bring the storm, but it lies with us to fortify our house so that there are no leaks. If there's leaks, it's because of something that's faulty in our construction, in our conceptual constructions. And that's our responsibility. In fact, we should even be thankful that the weather came to expose what we were lacking and what needs correction. Approaching life this way offers us the autonomy to always be in the driver's seat, no matter what happens, because we can't control the weather, but we can control how firm and how solid our own homes are. And when we do that, I think then we can be comforted. And that concludes my thoughts on the concept of comfort. And I hope that can be helpful. And that's what, in the process of my journey, I am trying to constantly apply and integrate into my life. And I thought that'd be helpful. Bye for now.